It's great to see all of you today. I'm Brian Napak, class of 1988, and this is my 30th reunion, which does seem a lot. So I've been hanging around the media industries as an entrepreneur, an executive, a consultant, a private equity guy, director, and now as the CEO of John Wiley & Sons, a 210-year-old publishing company based here in New York and one of the oldest companies on the New York Stock Exchange. So you can understand why it's such a distinct pleasure for me to introduce the next session, The Changing Global Media Landscape. In my career, I've worked in most corners of the media industry, companies like Paramount, Simon & Schuster, Disney, Macmillan, Blackboard, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and Providence Equity, a leading investor in the media space. With this as context, I am truly delighted to introduce Jonathan Nee, the Michael T. Freeze Professor of Professional Practice and Media and Technology and co-director of the Media and Technology program here at Columbia. I've known Jonathan for a very long time. He is known here at Columbia as a professor and mentor, but in my world, he is known as an incredible investment banker in his perch at Evercore and a sage advisor to the men and women that have created, recreated, invested in, and led the modern media, information, and education industries over the last 30 years. Moreover, Jonathan is known as one of the few people in the business who has the wisdom and courage to point out the occasional lack of robes on our media emperors. This was most notoriously in his 2007 book, The Curse of the Media Mogul, What Went Wrong with the World's Leading Media Companies. In this eye-opening book, Jonathan methodically disrobed some of the world's most revered media titans. Now, having spent a big part of my career on the education side of the business, you can understand how I was just a little bit relieved when I did not see a note of thanks in Jonathan's more recent book, Class Clowns, How the Smartest Investors Lost Billions in Education. So, I would highly recommend these books if you want to learn more about the media and education businesses. You can read more about Jonathan and our featured alumnus speaker on the panel, Mike Freeze, today, who Jonathan will introduce on the information sheet that's been given to you as you walked in. With that, I will turn it over to Jonathan, my friend and advisor.
Am I coming to you? Well,
you're going to disrobe me today? That's all I want to know.
Well,
is that what this is about? Is this a setup?
So, as you might imagine, if you're a banker and you kind of go that way, you need to hedge your bets. So that's why I started teaching here, because it clearly wasn't going to be a long-term solution for me professionally. But I also have the problem in the context of finding people who are willing to sit down with me. And luckily, you do just fine in Curse of the Mogul. So okay. Mike Freeze is whether you want to admit it or not, you are a mogul. He runs the biggest cable company in the world, and you probably, before you got your slip of paper about what this was going to be, never heard of it. You probably heard of Liberty, but didn't know what Liberty Global was, which is kind of breathtaking. So rather than have me get you everybody misty-eyed like you all were by the introduction to me, why don't you just talk for a little bit about your path from
Sure.
88 to now, to just kick this off, because it's pretty incredible.
Okay. First of all, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. And if you want to speak at this event, all you have to do is endow a professorship, and you'll get an invitation too. It's easy, really easy. But let's see, I'll start at the beginning. I was born and raised in California, one of 8 kids, which I think says a lot about me. I learned at an early age how to deal with chaos and confusion and collaboration, and I can eat an entire meal in one, commercial break. So, but then I was one of 8 kids in California. I went to a small liberal arts college, which was a big wake-up call. There's Jane, another alumnus of Wesleyan, which for me was about 180 degrees from my life, which was surfing and skateboarding in pools and playing football and living the California dream. And then I, of course, ended up in 4 feet of snow, and but I loved it. It was great for me, a big wake-up call on a number of levels. And I ended up in New York City doing investment banking. I've only had 2 jobs, so I have to start at the beginning because I've only had 2 jobs in my career. There's not a lot of ins and outs on the career path. But my first job was in banking, and it was a good role for me. I was I figured out pretty quickly that to be successful in that business, you have to be smart, sure, but you just have to work your ass off. I mean, you really have to be a grinder. And I was always a grinder, so I did well. And one of the great opportunities in the firm I was working for, and another alumnus, Paul Gunther, was very important in that company, PaineWebber, and he offered the sort of rising stars, I guess, the opportunity to apply to Columbia and be a student and keep your job, which seemed pretty appealing to me, and they would pay for it. So I applied and got in, and with that, one of the reasons that people who are 88 grads probably don't recognize me is I did most of my work in the summer semester, where I would take like 6 or 7 classes and grind it out, and they would let me off. Because banking is sort of cyclical. You can kind of get out of the loop if you're not on a deal. And then in the fall and spring semesters, I would take 1 or 2 classes. So I was really a commuter, in, out, not the executive program at night. That would have been maybe easier. It was the full thing. So, but great for me. I mean, so I had a job on the way out, so I wasn't as stressed as maybe some other of my classmates were. But I learned a lot and got a lot out of it. And then I went back into banking for just a year or so, because I had done a lot of work with media and cable. That was really my industry expertise. And in particular, the cable industry. And the cable television industry, for those who may not be familiar with it, you might read about it today as having died 6 times and it's going to die again, is one of the greatest stories in American industry. It was built by individuals who are true pioneers in every sense of that word, totally authentic, entrepreneurial, and I was doing a lot of financing for them, in particular out in Denver, Colorado, with a guy named Gene Schneider, who was one of the founders of a very large cable company, also with a guy named John Malone, who many of you may know is, is a media mogul on every level, but the nicest, most humble individual you'll ever meet. You can't disrobe him. One of these companies was, John Malone in his typical fashion was doing a bunch of deals, combining cable companies. And one of them that was sort of falling out, or one of the assets that was falling out of one of them, was some international cable stuff. This is 1989. And they hired our firm to help us figure out how to finance this startup. And the premise was simple. The premise was maybe people outside of the US want to watch CNN and MTV just like Americans do. This is, for younger people in the audience, you'll say like, what? But in 1988, MTV and CNN, that was it, right? It was a pretty robust and interesting product. And we said, yeah, that could be awesome. So we started, literally, I left PaineWebber, paid him back for the business school that they had paid for. And I took a 70% pay cut. I was the 5th employee. My first desk was like a cardboard box. And we were going to go all out and basically build cable systems and bring what we thought we knew was going to be an exciting and interesting industry to the rest of the world. We started with $20 million, and if I fast forward today, we generate north of $20 billion of revenue. We've got 50,000 employees. We're in 30 countries. It's a real business, but we started with nothing, and it was not a straight line. I'll be honest with you about that. I started in the development role, traveling around the world, trying to put deals together. Malone invested right back with us in the 90s. He saw that this was something he shouldn't have let go, which was great. And then the internet bubble occurred. And, looks like everybody in here will remember that. I don't see any high school students or young students. That for me was, the most important experience of my life, because we were rocketing, just like everybody in the internet bubble. Our stock was on fire, and we fell flat on our face. Our business required a lot of capital to build networks, to grow, and when the spigot turned off, our business was in trouble. And we got it righted, but it wasn't easy. Malone likes to say, you don't really know what life is like until you're lower than whale shit. And can I say that in this room?
You can. You did.
And we were. And I was kind of like, has anybody watched Designated Survivor? Yeah, it's a good show. I was like the Designated Survivor, kind of. I mean, things blew up. And I was at the time, in the 30s, I'm not sure exactly what it was. 35. And, Malone, who had, through a lot of complex transactions, had helped us rebuild the balance sheet, had said, you're the guy. And my chairman and CEO at the time was 70-something and was retiring. Long story short, I became CEO after we rebuilt the company. which wasn't easy to do. It took, for me, it took took everything I had, to be honest with you. And I learned a ton. We can talk about, lessons learned, I guess. And then, so we essentially got the business righted, and for the last 12 years, we have been out there consolidating a very fragmented network business. I mean, if you're a cable subscriber in wherever you may live, you are probably today part of a big, somewhat national company, Comcast, Time Warner Cable, or Charter. But in the day, there were tens of thousands of these little networks, and they needed to be consolidated. And so we've built the company into a very exciting business. And I'll just finish by saying that I wasn't kidding when I said people probably wonder how we have survived this, because in my 30 years, I can tell you that in no fewer than half a dozen times, people were convincing me we're out of business. It's over. You might as well quit, get your resume together. The cable industry is going to do one of these. And the truth of the matter is we keep reinventing ourselves. Today, less than a third of my revenue even comes from video. It's broadband, it's enterprise services, it's even mobile outside the US, and content. So the business has really reinvented itself, and it's done that on the back of a fantastic network, which is a gift that keeps on giving in our space, but also a lot of innovation, soul searching, good capital allocation. I mean, the entire industry is a case study, and there are lots of moments within the industry's history that you can pull case studies out. But, and these are perhaps the most exciting times, and we'll talk about that, that I've ever witnessed in my 30 years. The most exciting times. There's so many interesting things happening for consumers, for us, for lots of players in the space. So there you go. That was longer than you expected probably, but
No, that was
that's
great.
my story.
Well, actually, why don't we key off of the deal aspect of your life to focus on what's in the news now? I would say, as a deal person myself, people always say, well, this is the craziest it's ever been, but I kind of think this is the craziest it's ever been.
It's pretty crazy.
And in the U.S. right now, I mean, there are vertical deals, there are horizontal deals, there are consolidation deals, there are crazy Chinese deals, there are a million deals. But what I would say is, which is kind of striking at some level, given the point you made about what a great business you have is, because in contrast to that, content businesses are tough. You're on the board of Lionsgate. You know how tough they are.
Can be. Yeah.
I would say overwhelmingly low, the deals that you see in the U.S., not all of them, but most of them, I mean, Scripps Discovery just closed, Time Warner is pending, Fox is pending, Viacom is rumored. They're all about content. And that strikes me as a much dicier proposition. So why do you think that's what everybody's in love with, given what an incredible track record you and other people who are in the infrastructure business have?
I think it is one of the reasons this feels like unprecedented times is because we are witnessing, or have witnessed in the last decade, unprecedented technological disruption. It's not like it used to be. And we all know that, whether it's the smartphone, the tablet, your Alexa, where you're getting your content, everything's different. Everything's better, by the way. If you're a consumer, it's infinitely better. But everything's different. And in times like this, especially when you have massive companies in the technology space, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, it changes everything. And today, we're at a point where it's kind of like Game of Thrones. Everybody watch Game of Thrones. I mean, the White Walkers are coming. And everybody's in their boardroom, they are trying to figure out, where do we fit? What alliances do we make? Now, if I break it down, distribution, a cable company buying a cable company, let's say Time Warner Cable and Charter, that's about scale, pure and simple. That's about having more customers, having more leverage over content providers, having better products, better reach. That's kind of simple. That's about scale. But content and content coming together feels to me more like survival. Because I believe that take Netflix or others, while they are disruptive, we're hedged because people who love Netflix love broadband and need broadband, and that's our business. But content companies are feeling disrupted. I mean, Netflix is spending $8 billion a year, making 700 shows. They're competing for talent. It's a whole new world in the content space. And they're proving, of course, that consumers will get their content in different ways. They're disrupting the business model. And so content companies, I think it's kind of about survival. If you look at vertical integration, let's say Time Warner and AT&T, that to me is about fear. That is a massive mobile operation with national scale, national reach, a great, 200-year brand, whatever it is, 150-year-old brand, that isn't quite sure it's going to compete well enough in the next 10, 20 years if it doesn't have one of these goodies, this ammunition. Now, how they use that ammunition is the subject of the antitrust suit, of course. If they only let you watch Game of Thrones for free on your cell phone if you're an AT&T customer, for example, that might be something that the government isn't so happy with. Customers will love it if they're AT&T customers. So but that's defense a bit to me and fear. And the next wave of mergers will be fixed in mobile. Mobile companies getting together with fixed companies, like ours and others, and we're doing some of that in Europe. To me, that's about the future, really, because in the end, you don't really care where your connectivity comes from. Let's be honest, you don't really care, provided it's fast, you're getting what you said you were going to get, you're paying what you thought you were going to pay, and it works. Whether it's on a mobile phone or at home on your broadband and your Wi-Fi, you really don't care. So we're in the connectivity business first, and those kind of opportunities are going to continue. I mean, we've done, in Europe, 150 billion of acquisitions trying to piece together an industry, essentially. And I think it's going to be busy for guys like you who are, part-time investment bankers even. It's going to be busy, and you're going to have a lot to work on.
And so, given that you've done 8 trillion deals, you got to give us the secret. Which ones work and which ones don't? And you've been on the buy and on the sell. You've articulated 4 theories of doing deals.
Yeah.
You got the fear, you got the survival, you got the scale.
By the way, you can use that in your next book.
I want
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Write that down.
Note to self. You got scale, you got future. What are the things that actually drive whether a couple of years later you say that was a good idea or that was a bad idea?
No, it's a great question. I think there's a couple of rules of thumb for us. The first one, to be honest with you, just playing off your book, is don't be an empire builder. Empire builders generally crash at some point, or they exit at an inopportune point. Because if you're making decisions that are based on value creation and consumers, and as opposed to, how do I ensure it's me at the end of the day who's standing on the top, that's a mistake. The Viacom, CBS discussion, I don't know if anybody here works for either of those companies, but that's all it feels like. That's sort of a dynasty moment, and who's on top and who gets to drive the Cadillac. I mean, it's a bit strange. But if it's just about value, if you're just being honest and authentic and just thinking about value, then it's easier to make decisions. That's point one. I'd say the second point is you really have to have a reason. You have to truly understand what it is you're doing and why you're doing it to the nth degree to be able to not just defend, raise money, feel good about it, but then to execute. Because deals that look good in the moment, you got to figure 5, 10 years down the road, better look good then too. So execution and really understanding the execution opportunity to me is critical. I'd say something I've learned from John Malone, who is arguably one of the most brilliant allocators of capital, balance sheet management, tax efficiency, is you've got to finance things right. I mean, we don't always think about that in big deals, but you really got to understand which part of the capital structure you're using to put companies together, how much debt, how much leverage, what is the tax position. And then, then you have to just get it done. I mean, and a bad deal you can work out a bad deal. You can fix the synergies, but in the end, good deals even more require execution because you're usually paying a higher price. And you got either more debt or more leverage or more expectation. So there's not. I guess the last thing I'd say is there's an old rule of thumb, which I tend to believe in, which is just because you're good at one thing doesn't make you good at something else. And you've seen it a dozen times. You know, just because Time Warner was good at making great content didn't mean it understood the internet industry back when it bought AOL. And you know, we're at kind of at that moment. We are kind of at that moment because we're really getting into the mobile space. We're buying mobile companies, and the mobile business is tough. It's competitive. It is transactional. It is promotional. It's expensive to build and manage. So we're kind of at that moment where we're getting comfortable with the idea of buying. We bought a couple small ones, but you really you can't assume because you're good at, you know, A, B, and C, you're going to be great at you know, D, E, and F, and there you go.
You mentioned Netflix, and I don't know if you saw it, was it today or yesterday?
Yeah, I saw it today.
Comcast announced that they're going to actually partner with them and bill for them. That's new news here.
Right.
It's not such new news outside of the U.S. A lot of
Nope.
your markets have done that, but a lot of your markets haven't done that. So talk about, just in general, in the ecosystem you just described.
Right.
How do you, are they friend? Are they foe? Are they good news? Are they bad news?
Yeah.
What's the right way to dance with them? Does it differ in different geographies?
Yeah. How many people use Netflix in this room? Yeah. Everybody. There you go. And that's because they make great content. The secret sauce of Netflix used to be, it's no longer the case because it's no longer that unique. Used to be that you could sign on any device, watch it on any screen, anywhere, that when you signed on your iPad or your phone or your TV, it looked the same. It knew it was you. You could search and everything was dynamic and random access and on demand. And they had great recommendations. And that was the initial thrill, really, because they weren't making any content in the beginning. And you couldn't, there was nothing you could get on Netflix you couldn't get on Comcast. But in the end, they presented it to you in a much cooler way. And what we learned from that was we have to get busy on building better user experiences. Now, I don't know where everyone's from, but in Denver, you know, where I hang my hat anyway, we're a Comcast city, and I have their product there called X1. We have built a very similar product in Europe called Horizon, and that experience is like Netflix for cable. Meaning, when you can watch it on any device, it looks beautiful, like an Apple TV product on your screen. It is a user experience that you should demand from your provider of content. And so the first thing Netflix did was teach us that we have to get better at that. Now, not every cable company, there's probably a lot of people who don't have cable or are suffering from terrible cable. And, you know, that's a shame. I think 60% of Comcast customers have this device, 40% of ours have it now, and they will all have it at some point because that's what you want. We've become sort of a meta aggregator. And the reason that Comcast struck a deal with Netflix, and so have we, is that we know this. People who love TV just love television. They love watching it. And this is a golden age of television. So if I look at the UK, where we launched Netflix some time ago, penetration of Netflix in our pay TV homes is twice as high as it is in non-pay TV homes. Because people who have cable actually like television and they want to watch Netflix. Secondly, when you search for TV on our platform and you look for a show, any show, it's going to show up on the right. It's on BBC, ITV, Netflix. Where do you want to watch it? Netflix for us is a channel. And we've built Netflix into the experience like it's just another HBO. And that's a huge benefit for Netflix because while Netflix continues to grow really very, very well and very rapidly around the world, there's a small little cancer in their business called churn. So they don't tell you this because they don't report it, but 25 to 40% of their customers leave them every year. And then they sign up a bunch more, and it's a very low cost of acquisition, so they can get away with that. But at some point when it reaches maturity, that's going to be a problem. So the reason they're interested in working with Comcast and with us is because when we bill for Netflix, nobody churns. When it's on the box, it's just like HBO. I may not have my show on now, but it's $8, $9, $10. It'll be on. My next show will be on in 3 months. I'm not going to go ahead and bother disconnecting. It's in my package. So as a meta aggregator, we're a meta aggregator of OTT apps, YouTube, Netflix, BBC, whatever you want. It's all in one slick device in the home. That's an example of us kind of reinventing ourselves in this video space. So I would say clearly for us, they're friend. And when I think about the way they drive broadband for us, they're even, maybe one of our best friends. 25% of our traffic is Netflix. People love it. That's great. That's good for me. They want faster broadband. They're going to want a 300 megabit product, a gigabit product. So it's a pretty good relationship today. And since video is only a third of our revenue, we're not as stressed about it. There's a lot of other things happening in the OTT space. But as far as Netflix goes, I'd say they're, more friend than foe.
So you mentioned that back when Netflix didn't create any content.
Right.
They just did a great interface. And in fact, it's not that long ago. It was less than 5 years ago that Reed Hastings said very publicly and very clearly, I don't want to be in the business of taking creative risks. Let that be for some other schmuck, because I got a great business and life is good. He didn't have an out-of-body experience. He didn't change his mind about what's a good business and what's a bad business. What changed is competition. And the only reason he went into the content business is the only reason anybody does, which is because you have to, when you have to.
I think that's partially right, because especially as companies like ours get better at that user experience, and one bill gets you broadband, maybe even mobile phones, video everywhere on all your devices, and you just think, well, I got so much content here in my cable package. I hate the way it's presented, but now that it's presented more usefully in an interesting manner, maybe I can have a better relationship with it, which people do. I think he went into it for a couple of reasons. One, because when you start to go global, this is the scale point, he can amortize the cost of that content over a global footprint of 100 million customers. If I'm making a movie and if I'm Paramount and I'm making a film, I have a few angles. I'm going to get out into theaters and I'm going to sell it to broadcasters around the world, and maybe it'll do well, maybe it won't do well. But he's putting all of his stuff on every platform, everywhere on the planet, and that's a pretty valuable distribution business. Everything he makes, by the way, not everything he makes is great. He's got 700 shows, I think he's making. How many do you really watch? Few? I mean, I have a few I love. Each of us could probably, if we added it all up, there might be 25, I bet we all watch, maybe 30. You might go to Netflix for a movie from time to time, and that's for sure, but you're mostly there because they're making interesting content. Or, by the way, they have other people making interesting content. They don't make all their content. Lionsgate makes Orange is the New Black for Netflix. And so who owns that content is a related question. I think they've been much more disruptive to Hollywood than they are to us. Because when you're spending $8 billion and making 700 shows, and you're competing for writers, producers, directors, actors, that's a lot of tension in one town. So I think it's a bit, and they're shaking it up for sure.
So, but going back to that, is it, do you think, partly the case that because they created a global platform, and when you're buying rights for other people's content, you typically have to buy them on a country-by-country basis? You're
Good point.
competing.
Difficult to do that.
So
very difficult, you're right.
And so given that
I'll tell you something else, that just as in, Game of Thrones, right? And I haven't watched it in a year, whenever the last season was on, a friend today is not a friend tomorrow. So John Malone can actually take credit in some respects for launching Netflix, because he did the first deal where he had a bunch of content in a company called Starz, which maybe some of you know, that Disney had licensed to Starz for the internet, when Starz was trying to be an innovator in the early days. And Starz was failing at this internet service, so it went ahead and sold all those rights to Netflix, which gave them life for the very first time, because they could show real movies on the internet. And today what's happening is nobody's licensing to Netflix if they can avoid it. Because what originally was like a drug, Viacom would say, man, I'm missing my budget. Is there anything I can sell to Netflix? Do they need any of these old movies? Can we sell them some old television stuff? And people did. And then Netflix got big and they said, we're not selling it anymore. No more sales on Netflix. So they had to start making their own stuff for other reasons too. And I think your point about fragmenting rights is also a good one.
So you mentioned wireless, which is integral to your strategy. In the US, the coming of 5G is one of these subjects that you hear views from otherwise intelligent people across the spectrum from it's a complete hoax,
Yeah.
nothing's going to change, to wireless broadband is now going to be a competitor to pipes
Right.
in a way that there never was a competitor to pipes before.
Yeah.
Where do you
Well, it's
come
not a
down?
hoax, meaning that we will all at some point in time have a device with a 5G chip in it. It's just not going to happen overnight. You're going to have one though. Just like the phone you have today is an LTE/4G chip, which is better than the one you had 3 or 4 years ago, which is better than the one you had 3 or 4 years before that. The point is it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. There are a lot of things in 5G that have to happen right. You need chips, you need devices, you need spectrum, and you need a lot of infrastructure. So if you're, wherever you live today, if you could get on Google Maps, and if I could magically put a little red dot around every cell tower in your hometown, you would look at down at, I don't know what kind of radius, but you'd look at a very large area and you'd maybe see 3 or 4 cell towers. With 5G, multiply that by like 10. You're going to need 10 times. I mean, I'm making it up somewhat, but you're going to need about 10 times the densification, they call it, more networks, more towers, more infrastructure, because the more dense they can make that network, the more capacity they can deliver to each user. Because if there's one tower, and simply put, and 100 users, and then they have 10 towers for 100 users, I'm not sharing that spectrum with anybody. It's just fewer of us sharing that air, basically. Spectrum is air. So it's going to take a lot of money, a lot of time, and it's going to require a lot of connectivity to the fixed network. Because every time you make a phone call, it might go tower to tower to tower, but ultimately it goes back to a wire to actually connect to Europe, right? It isn't, if I'm calling somebody from, if I made a phone call right now to Europe, it's going to the tower, to a central switch, then right over the normal fiber network to Europe, or satellite. It's not going mobile to Europe. So every mobile tower has to have physical connection to physical plant. It's good for us. Second thing I'd say is 80% of the time, everybody's maybe different, but 80% of the time you're on this device, you're actually on one of our networks. Because when you go home, you don't switch the Wi-Fi off, you switch the Wi-Fi on. When you're in the office, you're on the Wi-Fi network in the office. In here, I don't know if there's a Wi-Fi network in here, you might be on the Columbia Business School Wi-Fi network. So invariably, because of the economics of mobile, the more you can get onto a fixed network, the better, because it's unlimited and free, in a sense, right? Whereas mobile is, that's the front gate of my house in Denver, oops. But whereas mobile, actually, you know, we get rated. So if you're on it, you get 5 gig, and then they charge you some more, they slow you down, or they, you know, sometimes it's unlimited, usually it's not. So it's a very different pricing package, because it has to be. So in many respects, the fixed business is never going away, because we're actually going to be, we're already, in our 50 million homes in Europe, ready for 1 gig services. Ready to sell you 1 gig. And you're probably going, what? I get 10 megabits from Charter or Comcast. We're already, our average speed in Europe is 100 meg, average speed, and we'll be at a gig shortly. So we'll be at a gig, and in 3 or 4 or 5 years, you might have a 5G phone, you might not. You know, maybe then we're at 10 gig, I don't know. There's no way to, the physics of our network, you can't keep up with that with wireless. But also the pie is such that only 20% of the time you're on your wireless network anyway. So maybe everybody wins. And then the last thing I would say is it's really not revolutionary. It is evolutionary. You know, it is the next generation of cell phones. That's all it is. And we got to get a lot of money and a lot of things to go right to have that happen. Hundreds of millions, hundreds of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. In Europe alone, probably $800–900 billion. And do you know that there are more mobile companies in Luxembourg than there are in China? There's 125 mobile operators in Europe today. There's only 4 in the US. So it's hard to make money in that business sometimes.
When you look at all of the geographies that you're in, and you think about whether it's the technology differences, the regulatory differences, just the legacy of who owns what differences, what do you think people in the US who always think that whatever it is that we're doing is really the only way God meant it to be?
Yeah.
What is it that we misunderstand about how all of these things we've been talking about interact?
Well, are you trying to ask like how do the markets differ, or maybe help try
Yeah,
again?
I guess I'm trying to ask, is there one geography where
Yeah.
things work so meaningfully differently, whether it's, I mean, pricing is different.
Yeah, I can tell you right now, if you live in Amsterdam, where we operate, you could pick up the newspaper or go online, and for 40 euros, so that's 50 bucks, 55, 48 bucks, not that much. 40 euros, you can get a 250 megabit broadband package to your house, a box like I described, like that box that Comcast does, with all your devices hooked up and all your content available everywhere. A fixed voice service, of course. We'll probably throw in a couple mobile phones for 45 bucks. Not 300, 400, 200, whatever your number is. It is a smoking hot deal. And there's a reason for that. Because one, it's more competitive over there, so we have to be better. We have to innovate faster. Two, we're investing a ton of money in infrastructure. It's all infrastructure-based competition. Here in the US, which I love, there really is only one network. Phone companies have given up on voice services and broadband. Cable companies have leaned into the network investment, but neither of them have to share their networks. In Europe, people have to share their networks. So if Richard Branson shows up, he wants to rent the network in a particular country to launch a Virgin Mobile product, he can just rent the network, or Virgin Broadband product. He can rent. We have to open up our networks in some countries. If all phone companies have to open them up. So a lot of competition, but they have, I think, been very balanced in Europe on the regulatory side. And so regulation is a long conversation. Maybe we'll have it, but I think regulation is, in our business, the first and most important thing. How regulators perceive you, the role they see you playing, what they try to manage or not manage, that is really the difference.
So again, it's a fortuitous week to be having this conversation with Mr. Zuckerberg looking very lifelike before the cameras this week. Privacy here, if you grew up in Europe,
Yeah.
or in most of your markets, and you came over here and asked people how they felt about privacy, I think you would be kind of shocked by, frankly, the lack of concern relative to the European environment. And certainly that is reflected, or has been to date,
Yep.
in the relative level of regulation. Talk about what kind of privacy regulations there are over there that you've got to deal with.
Sure.
Whether you think they make sense, and whether you think any of it's ever going to happen here.
Well, I'll start maybe more broadly, and I'm sure everybody's watching the same programs and knows what's happening. I'll start by saying I think this was inevitable, and I've been saying it for quite some time. Not that I know anything that other people don't know, but this was a train wreck waiting to happen. You didn't have to be a genius to see this coming. Think about it. These are companies with unprecedented global scale. And I mean, just do the math. 2 billion Facebook users. I think there's 1.3 billion YouTube users every day. I think Google does 5 billion searches a day. Something like 30 trillion web pages, 100 billion times a month. I mean, it's some crazy scale, and they've built these businesses with virtually no rules. A presumption, and in many ways a fair presumption, that they will do no harm. And Facebook is free. How can it be bad? It's free. It's good for consumers. Google searches are free. And there's a strong argument there that makes sense to me on a lot of levels. But no rules, no regulations, and quite frankly, not a lot of self-regulation either. When it's, you think back in time, when is it ever okay to show an ISIS beheading on video? Is there ever a reason for that to be something that a company invests money to support and distribute and manage? I don't think so. And by the way, they don't either anymore. But these kind of things had to happen to get there. Is it ever okay for a company to be so big, so innovative, and probably so complicated that they don't know 80 million customer data sets are being sent abroad for the purposes they were used for. Or Google, where in Europe alone, they have a 90% market share of searches. 90%. There are no other search companies in Europe. So governments inevitably had to get involved because these companies are smart, aggressive, entrepreneurial, great businesses, and they're not going to check themselves, really. Although I will say I'm on the YouTube advisory board. YouTube has started to check itself quite well, I think, and quite seriously, and I'll come back to that. But I think they, and today you've got governments involved. I mean, and that's inevitably what had to happen. In Europe, they have been much more aggressive in this area. So Google was fined 2.4 billion euros recently not because they have a 90% market share of search, but because when I search for a product, 90% of the time, nobody goes beyond the first page. I mean, think about your own use of search. 90% of the time. And in that first page, Google was putting their own stuff, which might seem okay, but is that fair, right? And the Europeans are saying, it doesn't seem fair to us. That sounds like an abuse of dominance. That sounds like you're distorting the market, yet you're not opening up products to other people. All the things they accuse cable of doing, strangely enough. And of course, the Europeans are now, as of next month, May 25th, everybody who operates in Europe has to comply with what's known as GDPR, Global Data Protection Regulation. And it's a very, I would say, thoughtful and impactful set of reforms that basically put it back into the consumer's pocket, all of their data. So for example, today, most of the services we use are opt-out. You think you're opting in when you get I don't know if you watched any of those congressional hearings, but one of the congressmen held up the terms and conditions when he had printed out. It was like this thick. I mean, has anybody read those terms and conditions? I'd really be interested. Not a single person. So in Europe, you have to be much more transparent. You have to opt in, not just opt out. No, I don't want that. You have to just say, I want that. Secondly, you have to be far more transparent. So people have to tell you what they're doing with your data, when they're doing it, and with whom they're doing it. That's obligated. That's an obligation. And then lastly, you have control. So that if I want my data erased, I call you up in 30 days, you got to erase it. If I don't like the way you're using it, you got to stop using it. If I want to take my data and give it to another operator, you got to give it to me, and I can give it to another operator. All sorts of sort of Bill of Rights almost for data users, and that's costing us all a lot of money to make sure that we're compliant. And then the last thing I'd say is there's enforcement. So if you don't comply, it's 4% of your global revenues. That's a pretty big number. Now, Facebook might say, I'd rather pay 4%. I'm not being cynical here. I'd rather pay 4% of revenues and not comply than put all the money and time. But Facebook has actually said they're going to comply. And they might voluntarily use that same regulation in the US, which would be great. I mean, we're all parents, we're all, business people, and I think it's been a bit crazy what's happening in the privacy and data protection space. And a little bit of self-control, a little bit of transparency, a little bit of, enforcement could go a long way to restoring a lot of faith. I mean, it's not going to help my kids. They don't care. Maybe our kids don't care, but we should care. Even if they don't care, we should care. So it's an interesting moment. I think they're shaken. I mean, as I said, I think YouTube's a great company. I'm proud to be on that advisory board, but they're shaken. When advertisers bail out or when they realize that they have to start narrowing the gap, not a lot, just narrowing it a little bit so that these extreme violence or, pick your poison, these things probably don't deserve to be part of the YouTube ecosystem. There probably shouldn't be a heart like button under some of that stuff. Maybe it belongs in its own sort of, penalty box. I get it, it's democratic, but at the same time, let's think through, and I know they're doing that. I'm really proud of actually what they're doing to voluntarily and on their front foot think through how to create a product that we all trust and feel good about.
I'm going to ask you one more, and then I'm going to open it up to folks. I know we have a hard stop at 1:15, but I want to stay on this regulation topic because some of the regulations, a couple of things you said are a little bit surprising. One is just that it sounds like you feel like the Europeans have generally done a good job around this topic. And I suppose before the current regime here, I would never have thought somebody could tell me 10 years ago that you would be way more impressed with the president of France than the president
Yeah.
of the United
Well, first of all, it's
States.
happening in Brussels.
Right.
But
Even Brussels, which is,
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
there's a reason for Brexit, and it's not because Brussels is efficient. I guess when I look at the political system here, and I look at industries, some media industries call it, I mean, after the 2008 financial crisis, ratings agencies were brought before Congress. It was not Zuckerberg, it was a guy on your board, Ray McDaniel from Moody's, who was brought down for the show trial. And everybody said, "Oh, please don't regulate me. Let us do it ourselves." And what happened? They did regulate them, and everybody said, "Oh, this is terrible." But when they left the room, what they really were saying to themselves were, "This is sweet," because certain kinds of regulations that add ridiculous compliance costs and fixed costs do one thing, which is make it a more scalable business, because fixed costs are high before you can do one thing. It favors the incumbent.
You're saying smaller companies won't be able to comply.
That's right.
Possibly.
It depends
Possibly.
on...
You have to define compliance,
That's
too,
right.
because
It
people,
depends. So there are certain kinds of regulations, like transparency, that don't require you to hire 3,000 compliance people. But there are other ones which, and you've already seen some behavior by Facebook, which they're using this as an excuse
Yeah.
to keep other people out of their other businesses, out of their ecosystem. And the danger of regulators actually making the situation, the other situation, which is the monopoly situation, worse.
I think
by
this is
increasing
different, though.
Yeah.
I take your point, and I'm generally not for regulation. That's clear. I think infrastructure, innovation, investment all happen, more productively, more efficiently, and more consistently in environments that don't have regulation. This feels different to me. It feels different for two reasons. One, just the sheer scale and size of what's happening, and two, what it involves. It's not a pricing issue, right? Where someone says, "Hey, you can't charge a certain price," but I'm like, "Hey, I put a lot of money in the network. I need a return on investment. Let me show you the economics. Don't price regulate me." It's not that. It's something more fundamental. It's our freedoms. It's our rights. I mean, it's a different topic. I'm with you on the fact that regulation rarely works. Regulators didn't create the internet, despite what Al Gore thinks. People like us in Silicon Valley companies who put billions, tens of hundreds of billions of dollars into this infrastructure, these great apps, these incredible services and platforms, that created it, right? And I'm with you, generally speaking. I don't know, this feels different to me.
Good.
But that's one answer you.
Questions, please.
Hi.
I used to run the TV channel business for NBC International.
Okay.
I just left after 17 years.
Okay.
And as I'm plotting out my next move, it's quite a challenge because as you're seeing all the players, converging, and for example, Disney trying to buy Sky, and obviously Comcast also is trying to do that after buying a studio, and so getting in your business.
Yeah.
What do you think is a media company of the future? And, where would be a good place to go?
Yeah, great question. It really comes down, I would probably break that question down a little bit. Like, we can talk outside, but I think in the end, it's really what motivates you personally. Are you a creative person? Are you a deal maker? Are you somebody who just loves the space and loves to be around those things? Are you a development person? It really comes down to where your heart is, and then I would give you different answers. If you're a creative person, if you're making content, then I would say, get out to LA, start working, with talented people, develop content organically on YouTube. Really, there's new platforms coming around. There's tons of money. There's more money than ever available for producers of content. It's unprecedented. So that would be one answer. If you just want to attach yourself to a rising star, I think we've talked a lot about them. I will say this, there will be If today Netflix spends $8 billion, Amazon spends, I don't know, $2 billion, and YouTube spends virtually nothing, Apple spends virtually nothing on original content, in 10 years, that'll be very different, despite what they say. So I think the big social and technology platforms will slowly probably get more engaged in content creation, development, production, distribution. Take your expertise and perhaps work with some of those and show them what they know. By the way, NBC doesn't have much abroad, as you know. It has a lot, but that's why the Sky deal perhaps makes sense for them. So anyway, we can chat afterwards.
Yeah.
Lots of ideas there.
Yep.
You mentioned earlier that you view Netflix as more of a friend than a foe, but that there are other OTT players that maybe you're more concerned about. Can you sort of elaborate on who you think are those foes in the OTT space, and if what their maybe competitive advantages are over sort of traditional operators?
Yeah, good question. So I'll go to one extreme. I think Amazon's a great company on every possible measure of what greatness is, perhaps with the exception of net income.
There is that.
There is that. But and the flywheel of Prime is extraordinary. Pay the $8-9, and we're just going to give you stuff. They're going to start sending ice cream to your house. Whatever. And the fact that they can just give people content, not maybe spend a few billion on it, but that concerns me a little bit as a competitor. Could be very good for consumers, we'll see. But that's when they came to us and said, hey, we want to be treated just like Netflix. We're like, maybe not. Because we're not sure what your end game is. If we put you on our app platform, because the way it works today is, on Comcast, you just hit apps, or on ours, hit apps, and there's Netflix and YouTube and maybe some others. If we put Amazon on there, what their real goal is that hit Amazon and never leave. And in fact, we'll do exactly what those guys do, much better over time. Trust us, give us a little. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. They're entitled to that. But I'm reading Titan, the book of John D. Rockefeller, and I feel like I'm living it a little bit. It's and there's nothing wrong with it. I'm a capitalist, and I'm all for people being successful. But if I had to choose one, I don't know how soon we'll be partnering with those guys. One example.
I have a question off of that for the consumer, like me, although I do work in media, is every time I turn around and try and get another, I won't subscribe to Hulu because I'm just tired of subscriptions. I got a subscription to HBO. I got a subscription to Netflix, this and this and this. At some point, is this going to stop? Or it sounded like over where you're dealing with in Europe, you have Netflix with that. But I got to pay the monthly for Netflix. I got to pay the monthly for this, the monthly for that. And I know these businesses want to make money, and that's obviously a solid source of revenue. But
you're going to pay more before you pay less. Here. My point is, most people haven't given up their cable or satellite subscription because they want the sports and the news and all that great stuff. And so they're just supplementing. And OTT today is like a vitamin. You're supplementing your daily diet with a bunch of OTT products. And when you add it up, it's a big number. And what people, like Jonathan probably study and has studied, and is worthwhile studying, is when do these things cross? When do the OTT apps, the direct-to-consumer products, get so good, so robust, so inexpensive that you could package them and pay and get mostly everything you want and drop what you don't need from your cable? And does that force, this is just one side point that you may already know. One of the reasons your cable bill is so expensive is that $45 a month goes straight to Hollywood. I'm not picking on Hollywood, I'm simply saying that $45 a month of your cable bill isn't going into the cable operator's pocket, it's going to the program suppliers. It's a big number. And that's part of the problem. That's why cable bills are so expensive, because for years and years, it's 7, 8, 9% a year. NBC, ESPN, Disney, raising their rates. If you want our channels on your cable network, you got to pay us more. Nothing wrong with that, except that they've priced themselves out of the market. So we're in this moment where this business model of $100 bill, $45 here, and is feeling wobbly. But it's going to take a little while of these, shots at it, the OTT apps, and customers getting frustrated for it to really tip over. So I think you're going to pay more before you pay less.
I guess the only thing I would add to that is that people generally think about when you hear about all the money's going to Hollywood, and it's true, it's going to Hollywood, but the studio business is a low margin business. It's always been a stinky, low margin business. And that even in this world where there are 500 friggin' series, people in TV production are making a little bit more margin, but they're not making cable channel margins. And over the course of time, the people who make a lot of money are the people who come up with smart ways to package.
Yeah.
That's what Netflix was. That's
what we're trying
in a
to
way
do.
what you do. So I don't know what the package is going to be. I do know that we haven't seen it yet. It's certainly not going to be these MVDPs. It's not going to be, Sling. It's going to be something else. And whoever figures that out, I think will be an interesting player, because you're right, nobody wants to subscribe to a bunch of different things, and people who come up with a way to easily and enjoyably put together what people really want, I think will do well.
Spotify just went with Hulu.
Yeah, I mean, aggregating apps, we're trying to be, that's what I meant by meta aggregator, meaning we don't want you to, if you subscribe to our product, we don't want you to have to forgo great apps and great OTT experiences, great direct-to-consumer experiences. We want to provide those to you as well. So we're going to put a whole line of video apps on there, and then we'll work on the economics. Do we pay? Do we charge you? Do you pay them directly? What's your subscription? The economics will sort itself out. Access is the main thing today, and making it easy. Customers don't want to work that hard.
Right.
You don't want to work that hard, and none of us do. And we're in this this moment of chaos, really, a bit, where there's this too much choice, too much confusion, and it has to, evolve.
Yeah, go ahead.
With regards to payment,
I'll repeat the question if it's helpful, yeah.
with regards to payment and regulation, what do you think about regulation of music and gaming within, let's say, a media company?
Yeah, I think gaming and home entertainment. I mean, those are incredibly. Yeah, I mean, if there's one area, get into esports. I think those are exciting areas. I think, and if I look at it from my point of view, number one, it's broadband, right? Because to be a gamer, you need fast, low latency, incredible broadband. And I don't know a product that grows 30 to 40% a year, like broadband. So I love that. More virtual reality, more augmented reality, more gaming works for us. You need a faster connection, lower latency. And I think esports in particular is really interesting. I was at an event a month ago where Bobby Kotick put up a slide, where NFL and his latest esports event. And it was incredible. The difference in numbers, activity, not making any money yet, but the engagement is really incredible. So those are, and I think voice control. There will be a time, not too distant future, where you will not press a button at home. You can already do it to a large degree today. You can pick up your remote if you're a Comcast customer and say, turn on TV, turn on ESPN, show me shows with Bill Murray. What was the name of I saw a demo the other day where the question was, what was that show where the person said this, like a famous quote, and they found the movie. I mean, you can search. So data analytics broadly is getting, machine learning is getting so incredible. It's all good for consumers, and I think, from our, talking my own book, I think we're going to benefit from that.
Way in the back.
Hi. Sorry. So you mentioned sports and news. I always wonder do you think this will ever happen if maybe these big companies like Netflix or Amazon or Facebook, will they ever buy the rights for sporting events?
Guarantee
and then
it.
What would happen?
Guarantee it. Well, Amazon already has, right? Amazon owned Thursday Night Football together with CBS. It didn't work great, but they bought it. I think it's very likely, because when you think about the massive content out there, live sports is one of the last remaining linear live experiences. I mean, I'll DVR a game if I'm really going to miss it, but it doesn't feel the same when I watch it. There's something about live sports that is pretty compelling. So I think you're going to see, I can't tell you when, Amazon's already tried and might continue trying, but I do think at some point, will Netflix have a sports service? If Reed were sitting here today, he'd say no, but he also said he'd never make content.
Exactly.
So Who knows? But
And the other statistic that's relevant that for some reason I looked at recently is that I think sports programming, live sports programming is like 1.4% of the content on TV, but it represents 50% of social interactions related to TV. So it is really key to engagement. Twitter did buy some limited sports rights, and they didn't win, but Facebook definitely did bid on some. So you absolutely will see that. One last question.
So, as a global CEO, I'm going to ask about Latin America, and the question is on growth of media. But the question is going to be put this way: if you had equity on a company that had 50,000 kilometers of fiber optics, and then also a company of cell towers, would you sell the stock or would you buy the stock?
so I got the 50,000 kilometers of fiber. What was the second bit?
Cell towers.
Cell towers. So funny you asked that. We recently split off our Latin American business. It's called Liberty Latin America. It's a business I helped build during 20, 30 years. And we've created a separate public company called Liberty Latin America. It's now traded on NASDAQ. It's smaller, of course, than Liberty Global. And it has one purpose, and that is to grow, consolidate, and innovate in that region. So we're currently in 20 markets. We're in all throughout the Caribbean, Panama, Costa Rica, Chile, and it's a massive market that has incredible need for the same things we want here. Penetration of mobile phones, smartphones, penetration of pay TV, penetration of broadband, 50% lower than America. So we know there's opportunity. Everybody's going to have this at some point. And we have both mobile and fixed there. More mobile than fixed, actually. Because I know your question, which is, do you need the fixed? Isn't mobile enough? Maybe, and for some people perhaps, but not for kids who are trying to do homework, not for businesses, not for most consumers who want to watch television. I think in the end, we're investing in our mobile platforms there, but we're putting more money into fiber and fixed networks. Because we know in the end, people will want this connectivity. And this fixed connectivity is like the lifeblood of even wireless. As I said, you need that fixed network even to make the wireless work. Because I can't make a wireless call to Chile from Costa Rica unless it goes through the network. So I think you need both, is what I would say. And we're actually quite excited about it. It's a higher risk, higher return part of the world. It's one of the reasons we put into a separate stock. But it's a lot of consolidation. Feels like 15 years ago. So we're kind of same movie for us. So we're excited.
So at the beginning, when I told you all that you'd be hearing from a global, or maybe the global thought leader about the media and telecom ecosystem, you were probably suspicious since I am the Michael Freeze professor. And you might think that I kind of have to say that, but hopefully you now realize that in fact it's the truth. So we owe you great attitude.
Thank you very much. Thank you.